The next part is our panel discussion. Really talk about the best practice, the insights about zero trust architecture, how do you do it, what do you need to pay attention to, and some challenges you may encounter, and how do you solve them. To help with that, we have Brian Baldock as a panel moderator. Eric from Microsoft and Michael from Cloudflare will join as a panel speaker. We are also very pleased to have Paul from RBC to join the panel discussion.
Right. Hey, everybody. Hope everybody's doing all right. That was a great presentation from Michael. And thanks, Eric, for the conversation that we had earlier. So let's start this off. Essentially, one of the first questions that we wanted to ask concerning the panel discussion is just really, why are we even having this conversation today? You know, what is zero trust and why are we talking about this, and why are more and more companies adopting this zero trust security model essentially? So who wants to go first?
I can go first. What?
Go on, Paul.
Hello. I think we're having the discussion around this now because we've got a situation that we've all been involved in over the past couple of years where we're not working in offices. A lot of us are not working in offices, and you know, a number of organizations have experienced some interesting breaches as a result of that kind of thing. Bring your own device and that kind of thing to the front, and that just gets everybody talking about what can we do to fix this problem that we have. And zero trust seems to be a reasonably good answer to that. So that's my thoughts on why the conversation is happening now.
So Paul, I'm curious, you've heard Michael and Brian and I sort of wax poetic over zero trust and what we think it is and what, you know, it looks like from the perspectives that we're coming from. I'm curious, being the sole person on this panel who isn't trying to sell anybody anything. What's your perspective on the zero trust? We know the why, that's clear.
Yeah.
But you know, as someone, especially in a highly sensitive organization like a bank, the biggest one in Canada,
Yeah.
You're a target, right? Your organization is getting attacked nonstop all day. Just, you know what, just like ours, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, you know, how much of what we said resonated, and I'm also curious. I'd love to be called out on something that you maybe thought was a little flim-flam. I'm really curious.
I actually liked most of what you guys said, and I wasn't prepared for that, to be honest. You know, probably the key point that everybody brought up is that zero trust is not a product. It's a methodology. It's a way of doing business. It's a way of doing our job as security professionals. And it's also a way that moves us from the traditional trust but verify model to trust nobody and continuously verify. And I think those are really important concepts that everybody needs to kind of digest before they set off on this zero trust journey, because there are a ton of vendors out there who are flogging a ton of different products that are zero trust. And you know, they'll all help, but they'll sell them as if they're going to solve all of your zero trust needs, issues, wants, and desires. And that just doesn't happen without the policies, procedures, and processes to go along with it.
You mean there's like actual work that needs to be done after you've pressed the button?
Yeah.
Hang on a second. There's a zero trust button.
And I think
Why am I unaware of this?
Good question. Zero trust button. Yeah, where's that?
zerotrustbutton.com. I found it the other day. It's
Just ask you to enter your credit card info, right?
yeah.
Yeah, I think that, you know, that's a really important point, that there's no panacea for this. Any product you leverage, any approach you take is going to require some some hard work. It's not just simple and easy. You put the box in, turn on the switch, look at the blinking lights, and everything's good. It really requires you being thoughtful about how you approach this, because the risks are real. I mean, the question before was, why are people going down this road? And the real answer is money, right? That's what it comes down to. And if organizations don't want to lose money, and they don't want to be on the front page of the paper saying that they've been breached, and so because that kills their stock price. So those two things those are the driving factors. Now it's hard to quantify, what does it cost to be the insurance for that, but in the end, it's really what it comes down to.
Yeah. So, on that note, are there any other misconceptions? One of the main misconceptions Paul kind of called out, and we were calling out as well, the fact that Zero Trust isn't a product that you can sell. It's actually just a mindset. It's a way of doing business, like Paul said. Are there any other misconceptions that you can think of that we can help clarify today for the people on the call?
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the thing that a lot of vendors are going to try and sell you on is that they have the one product that is going to do it all for you, and it's not. It's really more of a cumulative approach, right? And like Michael said in his presentation, it's really important to just start. Start somewhere. Pick somewhere. Do something. Start. And you can learn from that. You can move forward from that. You can expand it once you've started. There's like we said, there's no button.
Yeah.
I think I've seen a lot of customers try to, as I said in my discussion, get their arms around everything all at once. Like data center segmentation makes a lot of sense, and it's a good thing to do, but it's not mutually exclusive and not a prerequisite for doing some of these other things. So take push those easy buttons first to take advantage of the benefits you can gain there. You don't need to do it all at once.
Michael, I think you're going to need to add 2 words to your forward definition.
Which 2 words is that?
Something.
Do something.
Do something.
Like actually
Just do it. Wait,
Think
somebody
about
took
it.
that one, right? Just do it.
Yeah, that's all. I think that might be.
I think the other side of that. Sorry, I think the other side of that concept too is it's kind of important to define what Zero Trust is not as well, as what it is, right? You can't go out and get a Zero Trust certification for your organization, or maybe you can, but really you can't. And that's kind of a fact. I haven't seen one anyway that you can go and get. Has anybody else seen one?
You can get a ZTX certification from Forrester.
Yeah.
That's about it.
No, but it's a mindset, right? And
yeah,
Paul, you hit it on the head. It's because it's not a product. It's a different way of managing things. It's a different way of thinking about things. I think it's critical, and that whole do something can be something as basic as reviewing why you're doing what you're doing today, and putting asking yourselves, asking the hard question of, so why are we doing this? Why do we have this policy? Why do we have this blocker? Why do we do this? Why do we make these users jump through these hoops? What are we getting out of it? And contrary to a lot of security vendors' thought process, is the more security products you have in your chain doesn't actually necessarily make you more secure. And all it does is it adds more vectors for attack and more vectors for misconfiguration and potential peril, right? So that whole, going all Marie Kondo and getting rid of the things that don't, spark security, spark joy in your environment is probably a good exercise to follow as well.
It's often asking those hard questions, right? Like, why are we, like you said, why are we doing it this way And just because we've always done it that way, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right way to do it, especially, you know, as times change, as the landscape changes. And you kind of brought that up with Eric during our discussion with VPN solutions, right? Suddenly everybody's working from home and VPN gateways are exploding because they can't maintain the traffic or support that amount of load. And now we're seeing the inverse, where people are actually starting to go back to the office now. And after 2 years of having adopted, you know, remote work solutions, suddenly people are coming back to the office, and those same solutions, the VPN gateways, can't support the load of everybody being connected behind the same thing, doing all this cloud work, right? So we're kind of seeing both scenarios play out, and it's just actually a really interesting uh, experience, you know. And I think it's helped move this mindset forward. And I mean that, you know, kind of got off topic from the zero trust point there, but I thought that was really something to call out, because it really is an interesting fact. So what are some other, you know, core principles? I mean, we talked about it, Michael, you brought them up. And what I thought was really interesting was how similar, you know, Microsoft's zero trust model and how similar they were to your zero trust model, Michael, with Cloudflare. You know, it's different verbiage, but essentially the same ingredients come to the same, you know, it's the same mindset essentially, right? And we keep reiterating on that whole mindset aspect. But, you know, are there any other technology pillars or, you know, core principles that we can kind of tie in to this whole zero trust architecture discussion? And, you know, Paul, I'm looking at you because, like, what are you doing right now within RBC to kind of help adopt that model or push that model forward?
Well, you know, you guys hit on a number of good points within both of the presentations that, and like you said, there was a lot of commonality between them as well. The core things to focus on really are going to be around identity, around endpoint protection, and then cloud-based services, and being able to have that ubiquitous control over devices as they're connecting to your services. Control or policy, depending on how you want to phrase that. So I think that, you know, we talked about focus on one thing and doing one thing. Identity is kind of core. I don't think you can do this without identity.
I agree with you 100% on that. I think without identity, without a common framework, and without being able to uh, trust, ironically, that the users are who they say they are, and that the devices are who they claim to be. Because identity isn't just limited to the end user, right? The identity is also limited to the IoT device, to the printer. Is that Xerox multifunction thing in the corner in the mailroom really a Xerox multifunction printer? It was when we installed it. Is it still? You know, or did it gain more functionality that we might not be too fond of? You know, so that whole identity bit, I think, is critical, right? And if you have multiple identity providers spread out across different platforms, different applications, different whatever, that can get really, really challenging. So I think wrapping your arms around identity is absolutely critical.
And it's not just the identity of the people who are part of your organization. It's identity for the third parties who you do business with, who you give access, you provide access to some of your internal applications to, because they need that in order to do business with you. It's all of that stuff that's wrapped around identity. And again, like you said, not just the user. We need to identify the assets. Is it a corporately owned asset? Is it a corporately managed asset? Is it a BYOD asset? Right? Is it somebody's personal computer? Is it a phone? Is it a tablet? Like, what is it that's accessing?
And very often we start seeing scenarios where we're using personally owned phones to assert corporate identities. Because what do you do? Like in, you know, Microsoft's Azure AD MFA solution says install the Authenticator app on your device. Well, whose device is that being installed on? Well, usually it's the employee's device or the vendor's device or the consultant or whoever it is you're granting access to
Yeah.
has a device in their hand whose provenance you may or may not be aware of, whose veracity you may or may not be satisfied with, whose security and compliance you may or may not be satisfied with. And we're asking people to install an app that is used to assert their identity to get back to your corporate network.
Yeah. How does that make you go?
You brought up an interesting construct there, Eric, which was the printer in the corner, because we all know that there's been many high-profile cases of IoT devices being compromised and being utilized in botnet attacks and a variety of different other malicious behaviors. And it's got me thinking about one of the keys that I think about for zero trust, which is that if you can turn your corporate network into just a Wi-Fi hotspot, you eliminate a lot of the risks that are associated with those kinds of things. So it's one of those areas that's often overlooked. But if you could start to treat your network as a completely untrusted space for everything, and just another Wi-Fi network connected to the internet, you start to reduce that attack surface somewhat. And you already have it for the users. It's just now a matter of figuring out how do you manage that for the hardware that's on that network.
The counterpoint to that, and I don't have a solution for it, is that creates a whole other set of issues, right? Like, for example, if you turn your corporate network into just, it's open internet, whatever, well, that printer, let's say for argument's sake, our friends at Anonymous or pick your hacking group du jour, decide to take over that printer, and they replace some of the firmware on it with some code that exfiltrates a PDF of every page that is printed. Just out port 443 to wherever. If it's on an open network, how are you seeing this traffic go by? Are you seeing this traffic go by? Are you ever going to identify it? And then if it's not on your corporate network, if it's on the corporate network, how do you inspect that traffic? Do you crack open those ports? Do you use a man-in-the-middle attack to open the certs and break open the SSL and blah, blah, blah? Like, there are so many different things to think about that it's enough to, I know it's enough to keep a lot of consultants really
yeah, well, and
for a long time.
It goes both ways, right? And that's the challenge here, is like which, on balance, and it may depend on the organization, it may depend on the location. On balance, what ends up being less risky for any particular organization?
Yeah.
And even if you do that man-in-the-middle attack and start decrypting everything on its way out, what applications are you going to break by doing that? Because you can't do it to all the applications. A lot of them break.
Yeah, you end up with certificate pinning and everything gets broken, right?
Yeah.
Or a lot of vendors will tell you to talk to the hand,
Yeah.
I'll just look at us, right, Eric? I mean, if you start decrypting HTTPS traffic that's going out to Microsoft, we're going to say, no, man in the middle, we're dropping that connection.
Yeah,
so
like, sorry, you're not
I wasn't
connected.
going to bring it up, but yes.
Much to your joy, I'm sure, Paul. But yeah, no, there's a lot of situations where, the whole idea of zero trust comes into play, especially when we're trying to ensure that security by not trusting the device, but what impact does that have as well? So there's, a lot of common challenges like what we were just bringing up there, that can help us align to, certain best practices, right? And so when we're trying to implement, this whole zero trust mindset, what are some best practices that we can use, and how can we educate, even our employees about this zero trust mindset? Like what I mean, Microsoft, from our side, I know what we do and I know what we recommend our customers to do, but from Cloudflare's perspective, or from RBC, what you guys are doing, how do you go about doing this implementation and educating your people about this mindset and having them utilize it as well?
I'll let Michael go first on that one.
Okay. Well, I think it's relatively easy in an organization that sells services in this space, or it's easier, I should say, because understanding what this is and what it means to our customers means we have to implicitly understand it for ourselves. Right. So, for me, I have conversations. I educate sales teams and other groups internally here at Cloudflare, and one of the things I do stress is like, remember, these are the same things we're doing ourselves, right? We have certificates on our devices. We use hardware keys. There's all these things that we're doing based on identity to help establish the veracity of the communication to the applications. And we have different policies for different sets of applications. So I can do this on the browser, and I can do this. This one has to have the agent, and this one I can do for my personal device. All those things feed into how we think about policy. And I always stress that from an end user perspective, that you can think about how much focus has been given on the security requirements of security around an application based on what you have to do to get access to it. It's a really simple thing. So a website, I don't need to do anything. These other things, I got somewhere else I probably need to go and do, other than I need to provide my Okta credentials to something else. So there's a variety of different mechanisms, and those all are reflective of the level of security that's associated with those different systems.
Yeah, I think the ability to step up your authentication protocols based on the sensitivity of the information that you're accessing is something that's important to all of these things. If you're accessing public information, that's public information. We don't need to worry about that so much. It's public. But if you're accessing PII data or any kind of proprietary information that you need to keep within the organization, that authentication and the level of protection that you apply to that information has to increase commensurate with the level of sensitivity of the information.
Yep.
So what I can gather from that is kind of understanding, doing that discovery process and kind of understanding what you have first, right? It's not necessarily just blanketly saying everything's blocked and we're blocking everybody, we're not trusting anybody, and that you can't have access to this, but really understanding individual data points and knowing what they are and how, and having policy that reflects on those individual data points.
Yeah. And also education for users and employees, right? Giving them the ability to classify their information and use some kind of a tag on it so that you can apply policy to it as it's traversing the network, either inside or outside of the organization.
Right, that makes sense. Eric, what about from Microsoft's standpoint? When we're doing our education points on zero trust and how we recommend our best practices and implementations, does that call out anything in particular that you'd want to bring up right now?
I'm just trying to think of what I've been getting as an end user in terms of training or visibility at Microsoft. It's hard to differentiate between being a practitioner versus the end user. I'd say the number one thing that we're focused on in our little organization of 250,000 employees and vendors worldwide is basically jealously guarding our identity. It's really all about strong authentication, having socialized and really normalized this whole notion of multi-factor authentication for everything. What we've done is over the course of the years, we've actually started tightening the screws a little bit. It used to be, you could log in, you had your multi-factor authentication, you could log in on a personally owned device, a corporate owned device, access stuff. That was great. And then we started, as people started getting used to the concept, and we started socializing this whole notion of classification of data, automatic classify, both explicit and implicit classification and tagging of data, and levels of sensitivity. We started actually ratcheting back where we allowed people to do with their personally owned devices. So, you wanted to, before I used to be able to install Outlook on a personally owned PC, fire up Outlook, go to settings, add my corporate email address. It would ask me to authenticate and pop up my MFA prompt. I put in my MFA token and boop, I'm off to the races. And now Outlook is now synchronizing and life is good. And it'll push down a little Exchange active sync policy on my computer. But my computer's otherwise unmanaged. Now it's like you try to do that, it'll go, no, you can't get there from here. You want to read email on your personal computer, you've got one choice and one choice only, and that's Outlook Web Access. And then when you log into Outlook Web Access, it comes back and goes, oh, you want to look at that attachment on that email? Attachments are only readable on managed devices. So you can read the header of the email, you can do some basic, because the whole idea is we don't want to strand our employees, if they go on a summer vacation or whatever and they're stranded because they tested positive for COVID and they can't fly home and they need to get a PC to be able to log in and just send an email to their manager. Well, they can do that, but on an untrusted device, no, you're not getting Teams. No, you're not getting SharePoint access. No, you're not getting attachments. Yep. And we've sort of hammered that home. But that's taken, with the size of our user community, which is on one hand extraordinarily geeky, and then we've also got 100,000 non-geeks that are regular users that you would find in any kind of company, right? Because that aren't necessarily more technical than anyone else. How do you bring them along? And it's been a journey.
That's the key one right there, right?
It even extends now to manage the granularity of control within managed devices as well, Eric. So policy that says, that's requiring OS versions, posture assessment for patch levels.
Absolutely. Oh, you're breaking up there, Michael.
And just to add to what Michael was saying, reauthentication, regular reauthentication when you're doing something that might require additional, permissions or something like that are outside of just the normal bounds of what you're doing as a normal user. And Michael, looks like you're back now, so I'm not sure if I cut you off on your side, but you kind of froze for a second there.
But yeah, and like patch, Michael, to your point of patch compliance, I can tell you, Microsoft Patch Tuesday is Patch Tuesday. It's not patch next Thursday or patch in a month from Tuesday. No. It is Patch Tuesday. And if your device isn't patched by Friday, conditional access will just sort of say bye-bye and shunt you off into quarantine land and get remediated, and then we'll let you back in.
And really, like you guys have talked about in your presentations, this is all moving the security closer to the user, closer to the endpoint.
Yeah. And, exactly. And you know what? But I think also if you look at, the journey that we've been on, this whole concept of zero trust, it's not brand new, right? Like, I mean, it's been bubbling for 25 years since the first VPN is basically, been the start of it. But what's the difference between an end user today, a typical end user today, and a typical end user 25 years ago? End users today know how to install apps. They know how to go to an app store. They know how to go into settings and say, update now. And to tell someone to do that is not the foreign concept that it was even 10 years ago.
Yeah. So
if you can bring it closer to the end user and you can empower the end user to have a little bit more control over their experience, control their updates when it's convenient for them. Just because IT says installing the patch at 4 p.m. on a Friday afternoon is a good time for it does not mean it's good for the end user. Maybe they want to do it at lunch. Maybe they want to do it, whatever. Let them do it. And so I think there's a lot of that element too. We talked about jealously securing identity. Well, we jealously secure the endpoint too. The security of the endpoint is critical. We haven't even talked about data and apps and network segmentation and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, and that's just part of it too, right? And I mean, I think that kind of ties into the conversation about industry trends around zero trust as well, because Microsoft being a company that touts a zero trust mentality, And it's fairly recent that we started locking down our own endpoints, right? It hasn't been that long that we could install Outlook on a personal device. And so I really like what you said, Eric, about the journey, right? And that ties into what to what Michael was saying around first step. Just take that first step. And Paul reiterated on that. It's about taking that jump and taking the plunge and actually just getting something done, right? So taking that first step, and we're all in agreement. We're all agreeing here that the first step should be somewhere around identity, if I'm not mistaken, right? So
It could be. It doesn't have to be, but like Michael said, just start somewhere, right? And make sure it's something small and manageable. Something you can wrap your head and your arms around.
yeah.
And once you get success with that, then you can expand it.
Yeah. So, are we seeing any other, industry trends around zero trust right now? Like, obviously, zero trust in itself is kind of a buzzword and is being used as the leader of the trend itself. But, are we seeing anything specific that we haven't seen before? And I mean, like Eric said, zero trust is a concept that's been around for 25 years. But what makes it so prevalent now compared to before? Like, do we have the technology now? Are we able to do this now? Or is it just, is there something else out there? What brought us to this point?
We've got better technologies around identity now, I think, and managing identity is probably a lot easier now than it ever was in the past. So there's been some huge gains there. Um, and I think that's just caused people to realize that that this is something. Hey, maybe we can do this now. I mean, my first real exposure to this was at this concept was at a Black Hat conference like 18, 17 years ago or something like that. And it was through, if I remember right, a project called the Jericho Project. And they have a lot of interesting documentation out there that's still available and still applicable. The concepts are all there. So, having things done more easily, I think, is important. We, it's a good thing and a bad thing that it's easy for us to install an app. And that everybody knows how to install an app now. Everybody knows how to go to an app store and get an app and install it and do that kind of thing. Let's view that as a good thing rather than a bad thing, and see it enable a new suite of tools that gives us better control over everything that we do.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, very well said. Actually, we have a question from within the chat that I wanted to bring up really quickly. Karen was asking about, how rigorous an initial identity creation process needs to be to kind of secure it, I guess. And I don't know, I'll let the panelists hop in there because I've kind of got my own passionate response that I give to that. But maybe Paul, if you want to go first, because yeah, I'll let you go first and I'll hop in.
Yeah, I think it has to be somewhat rigorous. There's a process that we have called know your customer or know your client, and that applies to everything we do when it comes to client identity. When it comes to employee identity, there tends to be a heavier requirement on face-to-face communications or video-to-video communications these days. But that you have to do a lot to verify the identity of the person before you actually give them those keys.
Well said. Honestly, I would have said exactly the same thing. That's where I was going to come in. It's like it has to be rigorous, but doesn't mean it has to be painful, right?
No.
It just, you have to make sure that the person is who they say they are, and that ties into everything that we've been discussing, right? The the identification process needs to be solid and verifiable, as well as the rest of the signals that come afterwards. You know, the device state, anything else. So no, that's great. Thanks for the reply there, and Karen, hopefully that answers your question. So just one last question on the list here, and what I was hoping for was, so anybody in the chat and anybody who's interested in exploring zero trust and kind of learning more about it, you know, are there any essential skills or capabilities that they need to have in order to increase their knowledge about this, to, you know, actually learn and deploy zero trust mentality, I guess? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Loaded question.
Paranoia.
A healthy sense of paranoia.
Healthy sense of paranoia.
Yeah, healthy sense of paranoia. I'd say curiosity, curiosity and an understanding. I hate to say it, but you know, as much as we love to talk about work-life balance and all that, I think a security practitioner in particular's job is never done, and you got to stay on top of things. Things are moving so fast. There's no way that you can just consume everything that needs to be consumed in an 8-hour workday. So there needs to be a passion for it too. I think it needs to be something that's, I hate to say it, but fun to read on the weekend as opposed to a drudgery or a chore, so that you can take this newfound intelligence, whatever it might be, whether it's the latest threats that are coming out or new technologies or whatever, and then apply that to how you do your job during the week. Excuse me. And so to me, there's an inherent level of curiosity that is absolutely required.
Yeah, and it's not a one-person job either, right? Not anymore. I mean, there was a time when even if you were in a large company, you'd have the security person, right? And you don't have that anymore.
Yeah. No, and it's,
you know, I think too that there's an interesting factor to this of that you have to not be wedded to the way things have always been. You have to be willing to look at something, look at your architecture and your environment and your approaches to security with a new set of eyes. It's kind of a cliche, but I use it anyway, because those old assumptions are the things that have gotten us where we are. And in order to move past that and kind of adopt a new mantra, you can't base it on the old things. You have to think, what's optimal look like, and work your way between where you are now to optimal versus, well, how can I change this to be better?
I think we have to all adopt the mantra, change the game.
Yeah.
Right? The bad guys are constantly changing the game on us. We need to start changing the game for the bad guys.
Yeah, they have the easy job, right?
yeah, well, they do. But I think
defense is always harder.
that game also involves, I hate to say it, but trying to change our user communities as well, right? Most successful attacks. Like if you look at the headlines of the past couple of years, what have been the biggest, most expensive, nastiest cyber attacks out there?
Identity theft.
I'd argue ransomware in hospitals.
But in most cases, it happens as a result of theft of a user's identity.
But
in which case they get access into the resources and then.
But the identity wasn't so much stolen as it was handed over on a silver platter with a bow.
Yeah.
By an unsuspecting.
I was trying to be nice.
Yeah, you know, and that's the thing. Hackers don't hack their way into the network. They politely ask. And they go, oh, here, would you like to watch this cute cat video? What's your name again? Oh, thank you. And then they distracted whoever, and before you know it, your network is being traversed by God knows what, and hopefully there's enough defenses internally to protect yourself against it, right? But time and time again, we've been seeing it in oil companies, pipeline companies, hospitals, financial institutions, governments, you name it. falling
not.
like dominoes.
Yep. And then that ends up being really an issue with a vector we didn't talk about, which is email, but also user education, right? The training piece of this is crucial, and organizations who only start to train their end users about how to protect themselves after they've been breached, or in limited fashions or once a year, are doing themselves a huge disservice by not making that a part of the continual process of how they treat their end user community.
And also an organizational adoption of a mentality that, you know, we're human, right? We're going to make mistakes. People, you know, things happen, and not to necessarily, you know, punish the person who's reporting an error on their side, right? It's that people are open to, you know, taking responsibility, but understanding that, you know, they're not going to get, you know, yelled at for it, type thing. And that's a crucial point too, right? Because we can educate users about it, but if they're terrified that they're going to lose their job because they accidentally clicked on this link, that's not going to help them, you know, that's not going to help the education process either. So I think, yeah, and I think the user point, I think probably one of the one images that I found the funniest way of you know, people hacking, I guess you could say, is this guy was just asking. He said, you know, write your social security number in this chat window, and that's how much money you'd have if you were a millionaire. And I think like 6 people had replied to it with their SIN numbers. He graded them out, but you know, it's just it can be as simple as that. You know, just something really dumb that it takes 2 seconds you don't think about, and so you know, pushing for that that education aspect of your user population is crucial to, you know, adopting this zero trust mentality.
Yeah. And people don't even think about it outside of their own environment. So they think about an email, okay, you know, but what about when you go to Facebook, right?
Yep.
You've all seen those surveys. What was the first car that you owned? Like, right?
Yep.
Hey, this
What's
is
the name
the
of your
guy.
uncle's sister?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But
I
seemingly
just wanted to bring
innocuous,
up
but part of that same thing, right?
Yep.
I just wanted to bring up one thing that I've actually been incredibly happy with. One of the things that RBC is doing, and if you go to rbc.com/cyber-security, that is an area where we try and educate our clients as well. We're not just educating our internal user community; we're educating our clients as well.
That's great.
Another question came in the chat from Todd. Is there a security maturity level that a company should try to reach before adopting zero trust, or can zero trust just be the mentality from the get-go type thing?
I think it can be there from the start, and it should be there from the start. You know, start from a position of strength.
Yeah. Perfect.
I don't think it's hard. The thing Paul reiterated this is like getting started is not that difficult. And you don't have to wait. You don't have to be an adult in order to be able to start. Even small children can do this, right? It's a kind of, I think of it that way. You don't have to have a fully developed process. You don't have to have all the different components in place. You don't have to have all the different pieces of a fully matured security model to be able to say, you know what? Okay, let's actually do some things that make sense from a security perspective. So like it's a foundational aspect for that model. How can you possibly build a mature model without moving to a modern foundation for it?
Right. So maybe instead of looking at it from the security maturity level, it's more so looking at what you're currently doing that respects the zero trust model and sort of build off of that, right? Because chances are you're already doing something in the environment that respects the zero trust model. I mean, just basic security principles usually tie into it. So how can we take that first step that's already been initialized and then build off of it? And everybody's journey is different, right? Like we were talking about the different journeys that Cloudflare has gone down, that RBC's gone down, that Microsoft's going down, and recommendations that Microsoft makes to our customers too. And every single, you know, organization's journey is going to be different depending on their priorities and their policies and their mindset. So yeah, no, I like what you said, Michael. I think that really ties into you know, the attitude that we need to have around that zero trust mentality, right? And what Paul said too, that it's getting started. Take the plunge.
Yeah, and I think you hit on an important point there too, Brian. Zero trust is for security professionals. It's something that has been baked in to the way we think about security in general, and it's something we've all been working towards. It's doing all the things that we've always been told to do to keep our assets secure, our identities secure, and not deviating from that.
Yeah, great. Well, I think we're getting pretty close. Brian, I'm not sure if you're still around there or if we had like a timer on there or anything. I think we might be getting pretty close to the end of the panel discussion, but I think that went really well and I really enjoyed the conversation with everybody today.
Yeah, so really enjoy the conversation you guys have, and there are quite a lot of insights and from your past experience, all this history of the zero trust, right? So a lot of times you learn things from books, but I found the best way to learn really is from practitioners, and people are in front of this, doing that day to day. So definitely we learn a lot from the session. Speaking of time, definitely it's getting closer to our end of our session. We've been here almost like 2 hours. So for people online, thank you very much. If you stay until this point, really appreciate your consistency and commitment to learn. And for our panel members and speakers, really appreciate you spending your time come to share with our insights. And I'd like to ask everybody to give a virtual applause to our speakers. Thank you very much to come to share with us your insights.